Hello and welcome to our channel. It's Lois here from Lois and Morgana Davidson Art, and today I'm going to be demonstrating this windswept winter scene with a couple looking out over a lake as the rain clouds blow in. It's a loose watercolour painting painted with a limited palette of Payne's Grey, lavender, raw sienna, and burnt umber, and I shall use a little bit of cobalt blue for the jumper of one of the figures. This is my daily sky practice, so I'm trying out a slightly different colour scheme here. Just drawing in a very light, simple outline to use as a guide with some trees, a distant shore. This painting will mostly be focused on the sky and the midground. The foreground is just going to be sort of a something and nothing indication of the foreground to lead the eye up to the figures and trees and then up to the sky. I'm using a slightly different colour combination for the sky, so I'm experimenting today with burnt sienna, a bit of burnt umber and a bit of lavender, and then Payne's Grey. So we'll see how that goes, and then I shall add in some raw sienna with those colours and build up some foreground and just try and keep the whole thing nice and loose. So I've mostly just used this one wash brush. Use any wash brush that you like for this. The most important thing is that it's a brush that you're comfortable with and that you're used to using all parts of the brush, the belly, the side, the tips, that sort of thing. And you can see the difference in colour by adding in some raw sienna into my mixes and just adjusting them a little bit so I can get this really wintry, scrubby grassland in, just suggested in the foreground. And now swapping to the 1/2" flat brush, and again using some slightly richer, drier, darker paint with a little bit more Payne's Grey into it to darken it, and that just adds some tone and just a bit of variety into the foreground. And continuing to build up a little bit more tone across the sort of hedge and tree line on the near side of the bank. This will all soften and diffuse because I'm painting wet in wet. Once this has dried, I can come in with some stronger detail. Just going to flick a bit of water into the foreground, being careful not to flick the water into the sky, and that will cause some little marks and blooms which will give me texture and a bit more interest in the foreground, as I'm not going to be doing too much painting with the foreground. If you remember, we're going to have a couple of figures in this painting, so I don't want the foreground to be too distracting, but I do want some variety of texture and tone. I'm just going to now use my palette knife and scrape through the damp paint that's almost dry now, and this will just give me a few marks and indications of the trees that I want to paint in later. And this will give me a good base, but it will also give me, again, a little bit of variety. I'll have some lighter marks to work around, as well as the ability to paint in darker marks with my paint and paintbrushes. I'm working all the way along the midground, but I'm paying most attention to the left side because that's where I'll be placing my figures. I now need to leave it to dry completely, and then I can come back and do the wet on dry part of the painting. So here's the dry painting, and for me this painting is already a success. It's a sky practice and I'm really happy with the sky. I'm very happy with this new combination of colours, so I shall be using that more in the future. But to add context and just to finish the painting off and to get in a little bit more practice, then I'm going to paint in the distant hills on the other side of the lake using a number 14 synthetic round brush with a good point and just a fairly watery mix of Payne's grey, bit of lavender, bit of the other colours in it as well. I've just got this fairly neutral grey, and then I'll go in with a clean damp flat brush and sort of soften back the transition between the hills and the lake. And then I shall start to paint in my slender winter trees. So apart from some dry brush over the ends of the branches to indicate the masses of twigs at the end of the branches, that's the tree's just about done unless I decide to fill them out a bit more. I'm now going to use a small calligraphy brush. Any small brush with a good point will do. This one is unbranded. I bought it a couple of years ago from eBay. I'm going to now paint in the figures. And I'm just going to use whatever's on my palette, whatever I feel like using, with a little bit of burnt sienna, quite a pale value for the faces. And then I'll have a cobalt blue jumper on one of the figures, or coat, jacket, whatever. But I'm just keeping the figures really loose. I just want the indication of them in that gap between the trees, looking out over the lake. Now that the figures are placed, I'm going to build up a sort of a ramshackle fence on either side of the figures, stretching along the lakeside and the tree line. Using the same brush, just using a dark that I've mixed up from all my colours on my palette, trying not to make it look too manicured and trying to get it to look as if some of the plants are growing around it as well. Using the belly of my size 14 round brush just to scrape some dry brush over the ends of the twigs to give that illusion of the density of twigs at the end of the branches. So that's the painting just about finished. So I'll remove the tape and we'll see how it looks with a clean white border. So here it is with its border. I think it maybe just needs a couple more touches added to the figures. It's not really going to notice too much, but to me I can see it needs a little bit of dark just on the heads and the shoulders, and just a tiny bit of definition here and there, and that should finish the painting off. Well, I hope you enjoyed this sky practice. This spring it'll be approaching 6 years since I first started learning how to paint in watercolour, and I think since then most days I've painted a sky because I really love painting them. For me, I think it's the most important part of the landscape, and I like to have my skies looking really as fresh as I can make them, and that of course takes quite a lot of practice. Well, thank you so much for joining me in my studio again for another sky practice. Please leave us a like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And thanks so much to everyone that supports the channel on Patreon. We really do appreciate you. And if you'd like to support the channel, then please follow the link below. Many thanks again. Take care and happy painting. Bye.